Preechy podcast coming at you. It's a Thursday morning. Well, I guess it's not morning anymore, but it's right around. It's like 12:30 or so. So it's right there. Hope y'all are having a great day. Today we are talking about resilience and growing pains and just how one can feed into the other. And, you know, these two things work hand in hand. Cameron, how was your day today?
My day was pretty good. It's going pretty well. I mean, it's still pretty early, so I haven't really done much besides prepare for the pod and, do it. But
hell yeah.
It's off to a good start.
You heard the man. Make sure you are liking, sharing, subscribing. We are on Spotify. We are on YouTube. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on Breaker. We are on so many platforms. Catch us anywhere. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Twitter. I am personally seeing to it that the Twitter has more of a presence. So throw us a follow. Same thing with the Instagram. You know, why not? All our information is there. Anytime a new podcast comes out, you'll find about it first there. And yeah, check out our Discord. Filled with lovely people. We stream every Friday, so that's pretty fun. Yeah, check us out. And Cameron, if you don't have anything else, shall we get into it?
I will say this was definitely a very fun pod. I think you guys will for sure enjoy it when it comes to if you're in school or maybe that you're in a transitional period.
Yeah, maybe you're just struggling. Check it out.
In a struggle, and there's a nice rant at the end in there too.
Exactly. If you don't like conflict, listen to that rant.
If you like the blood sports, definitely tune in. And I think this is gonna be good listen. Hopefully.
Yeah, good listen. Hope y'all enjoy. Don't forget to wear a mask, get vaccinated, stay safe, and most important, enjoy the podcast. And we are back. So clearly, as the title, you can tell, we today are talking about growing pains and resilience as it relates to growing pains. And, you know, when you hear growing pains, you know, there's definitely a couple different I don't want to say explanations, but like there's some definitions. And I think for us today, we're going to be talking about sort of the transitional periods in life in terms of growing pains. Cameron, growing pains, what's up?
Yeah, I think that the conversation on growing pains is like really important because there are these like transitional periods in life where there are these kind of unconscious stresses that we don't necessarily know where they come from, but whenever we're kind of making a change in life, they definitely like come and pop up and they affect us in ways that we don't quite understand without like really consciously focusing on them.
Yeah.
So I think that we're going to go through some topics, and maybe you guys can relate to some of them more strongly than others, but it's definitely a conversation that I think is important for people to really like be aware of the things that are kind of impacting them when they're transitioning through life or, you know, going through different stages when it comes to, you know, getting out of college or even going into college, you know, dealing with like tests during high school versus dealing with like the SAT and like applying to college and all these like small things that definitely come into play.
Yeah, they truly, all these things that we do in our life, we don't think they affect us, but they truly do. And to the extent we don't really know because that's not how the brain works, unfortunately. It would be really cool if it was just like anxiety and then the brain was like, here's how you fix it.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are like that, but not everyone. Anyway, so I think it's important to say that, you know, growing pains and just these transitional periods in life, again, they affect all of us. It could be anything between, as Cameron said, you know, going to college or something as small as, you know, when you're on a sports team and maybe you're not on that team anymore.
Facts.
It's the fact that you are in a certain mindset and you're in a flow. And then once you're taken out of that flow, shit starts to get complicated. So I think first thing we had sort of mentioned for us was college to adulthood and sort of the growing pains in that and how we are dealing with it. Because I think right now that's a great example of a place we are both at, and we're sort of trying to establish ourselves and establish our careers. So as an artist, do you find that these growing pains are louder? Do you find that there's more pressure? How do you experience your growing pains post college to adulthood?
Yeah, I definitely think it's really difficult. Like the transition into the job market is definitely really difficult. Like even outside of like graduating in a pandemic, I think one of like the biggest growing pains is the mental shift of like being within a structure of school
Mm.
where like things are essentially kind of decided for you and there's a path laid out for you to go to like being independent where every decision is like really your choice. You know, like within school there aren't really many choices for people to like take responsibility for the decisions like outside of doing or not doing the work that they're given.
Mm-hmm.
Like things like club activities and like extracurriculars without strict supervision give like a taste of what that's like, but the level and like sheer amount of decisions that someone faces when they're out of school is like such a huge leap. Like unless you've had experience being independent, it's really a difficult change of pace.
Yeah, and I think talking about change of pace is really important because you go from, as you said, being in the school structure to now being in a structure that you yourself have to define and build, especially if you're living by yourself,
Yeah.
because there's not somebody there who's telling you, okay, let's go, time to get up, you have to go to work, or hey, I made you some breakfast. I mean, unless you're living with a significant other and they're really, really kind and just great and they're that person for you, awesome. But it's a step away from school because rather than being told what to do, you're like, okay, well, now what?
It's
and
essentially like
and you
this
have
like
what were you gonna say?
this may be like a bit like kind of exacerbated because of my like occupation as like a freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm sure there are many people that deal with this type of like growing pains, even if your path from college is like more streamlined. Like if you decide to take the path of like being your own boss rather than like seeking stability, I definitely would warn you about the difficulties of some of this. Like though I do know some personalities like fit into this kind of mindset better than others in this mold.
Shout
It,
out Radia.
that shout out Radia. It's definitely something that is hard to do, especially if you haven't had many experiences of like overcoming a lot of difficulties and navigating decision fatigue and stuff like that.
Yeah, because when you're going from that sort of mindset of, and I think this ropes in well, sort of another thing we want to talk about where, you're sort of dependent on what somebody else is telling you to do. And okay, I know I'm going to go to work tomorrow and I know I'm going to do X, Y, and Z versus, again, when you're just by yourself and as you said, freelancing, all of that is on your own shoulders. And being able to recognize that and be like, oh, wait, nobody's necessarily gonna get mad at me right now if I don't do this. And understanding that, okay, while that is true, I still need to get shit done. I think that's a really important step for people to take because it's hard. It's really hard to know what to do and then go out and do it in terms of a career because especially now in a pandemic because nobody, you have job fields that have completely evaporated.
Yeah,
Like waiters. What the hell are waiters doing? I know restaurants are slowly opening up again, but it's not going to be the same as it was a year ago. So now you have all these people who are looking for jobs and yeah, there are some jobs open, but it's much harder. You have to be much more of a self-starter
yeah,
because the opportunities aren't going to be there now.
for sure. And that kind of leads into my question for you, which is like I know that like me and you have definitely had like kind of different paths, especially when it comes to post high school, and I kind of
Just a
wanted
bit.
just a bit. I kind of wanted to touch on like what was kind of like the experience going from being in high school to having a job versus now you now have a job, but now you're really trying to like establish your career. Were there like any type of like difference in growing pains? Like, were some worse than others?
Yeah, so when I finished high school, I went to community college for a little bit, and then I worked, as you can tell by my LinkedIn profile. Shout out LinkedIn. If you're looking for a great podcaster, check out my LinkedIn. Anyway, the feeling that I had when I wasn't in school and I was working, it was sort of like, okay, this isn't, because I didn't need to work. I was just sort of working because it was something to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when you're working like that, after 6 months, that shit gets old really quickly, because especially if you're in a situation where your bosses are people you don't like or necessarily respect or can't really work with, that then leads to lack of motivation to work. And then when you're in a position where you're not working and you're not in school, it's like, well, fuck, now what? So I ended up going back to school. But just sort of that feeling of, I didn't feel I had to go to school, or I didn't feel I needed to work. These were just sort of things that I knew eventually had to happen, but in my brain, it was sort of just like, okay, I'm doing this because I want some money and it's something to do. And now, trying to establish myself in a career field I actually want to go into versus still working, while I feel it's still important to be going out and working. And I do thank my job very much, because during this pandemic, it's gotten me out of the house at least 4 times a week, which has, for my mental health, probably benefited me a lot more than I can even appreciate. Just
sure.
because I don't realize what the other, the grass on the other side of the fence might look slightly green, but man, that's definitely just some emerald tinted glasses there. Because again, if I wasn't getting out and I wasn't working during pandemic, I probably would have pulled my hair out. So now I'm in a position where it's still good for me to be working and trying to establish myself in a career path that I really want to is sort of tough, because as I said, people aren't necessarily looking for these jobs right now. And so I feel there's more weight on me to make my stuff more presentable.
Yeah.
Whether it's watching a YouTube video about how to sound edit better, or watching stuff how to be a better podcast host, whatever it is, that pressure is a lot stronger now, because I'm 23, I still live at home, unfortunately, and I don't want to say unfortunately, because it's a pandemic, and you know what, I do pay rent, thank you very much, and I'm in a place where I know I need to take that next step, but I'm in a place where I can see what I need to do in the future. I know what I need to refine. And I didn't know that getting out of high school and working that job. I didn't know what I need to do. And I don't even know if I necessarily know what I need to do. I just know that I'm doing stuff. And doing stuff specifically as it leads to career advancement and just advancement within yourself, whether it's self-growth or whatever. I find that it's been nice, because it's a fire, right?
Yeah.
So you went to art school, and that's definitely a less traditional path than regular school, and so is just being an artist in general, because most of your work, especially now, is freelance. You're not contracted, you're not doing a fellowship, nothing like that. So the pressure on your shoulders as well, you must feel that sometimes as well. I said as well a lot. Sorry, listeners.
I wasn't really prepared in school to really be a freelancer. Like, they kind of gave us like the practical skills in terms of like being able to draw people and, the storytelling skills that are necessary to become a cartoonist, etc. But there was really no preparation for actually dealing with the fact that if you like the inconsistency that comes with being a freelancer. sometimes I might have like 3 jobs lined up for a month, and other times I might have no jobs lined up for a month. And
Mm,
really growing my customer base and everything like that, which is also tied to things like social media, which I didn't realize were as important when I was in high school or in college, are now becoming like extraordinarily important and honestly deciding a lot of like my mental mood some of the time, well, most of the time.
mm.
And all these factors are definitely some of the difficulties of being a freelancer.
Yeah, I think especially in sort of our society where so much is placed on monetary value, I think it's so hard for artists because there is intrinsic value placed on their art by them. And it must be kind of disheartening when you're putting your soul into some work and society's like, $5.
No, for sure. There are definitely times there's like I've had a lot of frustrating situations where someone comes to me and they're like, "Oh, I have this great idea, blase blase, we're gonna try to do this, that, and the third." And it comes down to it, and they're like, I'm like, how much am I gonna get paid? And they kind of go silent. And I'm like,
Mm.
"You really not think that did you think that I'm doing this for fun? Like do you think I kind of don't understand sometimes that people, even other artists, whether it be like when I'm doing work for musicians on like album covers, like they don't like a lot of people don't understand that someone else is actually like living off of the money that they're making doing this, and that the things like making art takes a lot of time. And it is really kind of disheartening for people that don't necessarily like acknowledge the amount of effort that you're putting into your work and stuff like that. But I do think that being able to like really self motivate and really still love your work despite what you
Mm.
think about it is one of the harder things to do about being an artist, unless you have like a huge following or something like that.
So you talk about how the love of your work is really, that helps. What are other things that sort of help you build that resilience when when there are those months where it's like, shit, nobody's commissioning me. Like what the fuck am I doing? What is still getting you out of bed to be like, hey, draw?
I like, especially like when I first got out of college, I definitely had that problem of like motivating myself, and I'm still really working on it. Some days I get out of bed and I really just don't want to do anything, but as as it goes. But I think it's the feeling that I'm building towards something, like having my own goals that I've really set for myself, and really thinking that they're important and thinking that that's where I want my future to go, despite like maybe not having commissions or anything, but just having that feeling that I'm really working towards something and having those goals definitely like propels me regardless of whether people are really taking an interest in my work. Though I will say, I think one of the hardest things about being a freelancer, and this is to especially like a message to those in art school or maybe those that are just graduating art school, is that our culture right now is not really set up for creatives. Like when like when you graduate with a degree, there's a certain sense of a degree in like business or something like that. There's a certain sense of, oh, I will now just like apply to jobs and that will be, and you're kind of set. You know what I mean? Unless you're switching jobs, but you can find that stability if you can find that job relatively quickly. Of course, we're in a panty right now, so it's a bit difficult for that. But when you're a freelancer, you're really kind of building for that long goal. Like the worth in your art is a long-term investment. And I think really acknowledging that your work may not be that valuable to other people in the short term is something that you really have to come to terms with as a freelancer. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, I am investing in my own future by creating this work. And it's really hard to kind of divorce yourself from like where you want to be versus where you are.
Yeah.
Because like right now I'm sitting at like whatever, like I just hit like I think 1,000 followers or something like that.
Oh, yes, sir. If you're not already, follow at Stolo on Instagram.
Yeah, but I mean like in the short term, if I'm really trying to build a career, 1,000 followers is not gonna actually help me like survive. You know what I mean? And but it's important that I still celebrate that success because it's part of the process of me getting to where I want to go.
Exactly. You're not going to get to 10K followers without getting to 1,000.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is really managing the ego because I think sometimes it's like, oh, like you're upset that you're not at 10K followers because you think you should be at 10K followers. And that's an important step of like where I have to acknowledge that my ego is coming out, or maybe someone else might have to like really introspect on that moment and be like, well, whenever you're putting the ought statement, the should on there, it's a lie. It's a fallacy because like no one should be famous, or like no one ought to be famous. It's just that the world sometimes works in a way in which you might get recognized faster or it might take longer than other people.
Yeah, exactly. And
really
I think
taking off the comparisons with other people is definitely a huge part of becoming like a successful freelancer.
And I think just talking about comparing people, I think that's a good way to because I find when I'm in relationships that then end, I have an issue, during that transitional time of like being like, oh, they're doing this, and this right now, and they're getting this done, and they're getting this done, and like, what the fuck am I doing? And I think while that's natural, it's not really healthy because, it's not fair to compare yourself to other people because everyone's on their own path, right?
Yeah.
And you say this a lot where, people are always like, oh, well, if I was in their shoes, I would have done this. And it's like, well, no, because if you were in their shoes, you would have made the exact same decision they would have made.
Exactly.
And I think that taking the time to sort of during these transitions and during these times of change, specifically when you're losing people who are close to you in your life, like a girlfriend, that stuff is really hard because there's an element of companionship that's no longer there. There's also an element of reassurance that's no longer there. And when you're taking those away, it's sort of you're truly relying on yourself. You're truly relying on yourself. I mean, unless you're making unhealthy decisions. But separate conversation.
Yeah, and I think that definitely like that kind of echoes the topic of like going from being like dependent to independent right now.
Exactly.
It's like I feel like at some point you're going to have to decide when to be like truly independent and take control of like your finances and living situation.
Yep.
And I feel like some people have this like responsibility at an earlier age. And although I feel like that can be harsh, as I've seen how that kind of harms people in certain situations, I do believe it gives them a leg up on people that may be more privileged or given like less responsibilities. Like into their adult life.
Because it's your resolve, it's your resilience. Then know in your bag you have the tools to deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. So you have that perspective of being like, wait, I feel like how now? And then in your mind you're like, wait, I felt worse than this. I must be able to handle this, okay? And then you'll have days where you feel worse, but you still have that knowledge in the back of your mind, like, okay, I got this. Like, I got me.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
Oh, for sure.
That's what really matters, to be able to say, to have the resilience to be like, yeah, it really does fucking suck that we broke up. But you know what? I'm still a bad bitch. I'm still going to get shit done. And not just saying that, but then believing it and doing it. I think those are true signs of resilience because, man, you could just give up. You could give up and say fuck all for however long. And it's sort of acceptable in our society to do that. Especially currently because I feel we're very aware of people's feelings. But at the same time, keeping yourself in that mindset over a long period of time isn't healthy.
Yeah.
So you need that resilience to be like, nah, I got this. I'm gonna do this. And when you're doing that, I think not only does it distract from whatever else you're obsessing over, it also just, again, it's something to hang your hat on. Not only as a distraction, but it's something to be proud of, because you're like, you know what? I was really feeling terrible today. I was feeling awful. But you know what? I got up, I made my bed, I went for a run. I still did those things, even when I was feeling terrible. And that's just a small stepping stone to being able to be glorious at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think when it comes to the topic of resilience and maybe a lot of us not having that kind of resistance to it, I think one of the things that people also kind of step over is the strategic element to dependent. And I think that, like, I feel like somewhere along the line there's eventually going to be like a feeling of like self-judgment or a need for freedom and autonomy that like comes into play and spurs on the need to be independent. But like knowing when and how to execute on that feeling requires like a complex string of decisions depending on your personal situation, and you have to really weigh the pros and cons. Like I feel like sometimes it might be better to be dependent a bit longer, if it allows you to reach certain goals faster. Or other times it might be actually deceptively better to leave quicker if maybe the people around you are hindering your progress despite you being comfortable. Like there's a lot of decision making that comes into play when it comes to like really taking your independence that I feel like not a lot of people are necessarily aware of the amount of decisions that you're going to have to make. And
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important to recognize you saying that, because that then brings into the element again that just everyone's path is different and everyone's decisions they're unique. So it's again, it's stupid to compare yourself. That's all I was going to say.
Oh yeah, like checking ego is definitely like is something that I've definitely had to just continuously do, and I still work on and continuously do. On the same topic of decisions, I think one of the biggest things that has kind of helped me navigate some of these growing pains, and I'm also still working on as it goes, is small habits.
We're always working on shit.
We're always working on shit.
That's being a human, man.
Yeah, but I suppose I should say one of the things that I'm discovering more recently.
Fair.
Small habits, like
small habits, yeah.
Like one of the things, like things like making sure you wake up at like a scheduled time, taking breaks, like meditation, working out, like are all these like small things that like really help streamline life. And like I again want to touch on the staggering amount of choices you have to make when becoming independent. And sometimes it might logically make sense to make as many decisions as possible to assure that you go in the direction that you've chosen. But that's a fucking trap. Like it's a trap, bro. Like
yeah.
Having too many decisions to make is the easiest way to get paralyzed and the easiest way to make the wrong choices.
Because with the more decisions you are making, there's more noise. And with the more noise, you're going to get distracted from what's really important.
Exactly. Like, I think, like, willpower is weak at the end of the day.
No, it is.
Willpower is weak.
Yeah.
And if you continuously give for example, if you continuously give yourself the choice to, like, work or play games, for example, you will end up playing more games than the person who didn't give themselves that choice.
Exactly.
Like you have a stronger will to work than that person.
Yeah, and it's sort of just that resolve to be like, hey, I've done manual labor the past 2 days and I'm tired, but doesn't matter. It's my day off. I'm gonna go for a run and I'm gonna do, productive stuff. Whether it's apply for a job or whatever. No, you're right. And it's about those little habits and keeping yourself honest to them.
Yeah.
And knowing that, okay, this is within my abilities. I can do this. Do I actually want to do it is the question. And that's where, again, I know we've said it, But that's where the resilience comes in, where it's like, fuck you, I'm getting out of bed. I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that resilience is so different for everyone. You know, resilience for one person could be I'm a Marine and I fought up this hill and I conquered this in the rain and fighting through mud and fighting through bullets. Yes, that is absolutely one type of resilience. But resilience can also be like, man, as I said earlier, man, I'm so depressed. I don't want to do anything. And you know what? Resilience can be just you eating. Just being like, hey, today I'm taking care of myself. I'm making decisions, or I'm going to make a decision that's going to lead to the betterment of me.
For sure. And one of the things that I think is like maybe one of the most important things that I might say in this podcast is when especially on the topic of creating habits, like when creating these habits exist for you to reduce the amount of decisions you have to make. And like I think like a lot of the time like I do think a lot of people are looking up like life hacks and all. There's a huge market on YouTube and stuff like that.
Oh, self-help and
Self-help, all this stuff, you know. And I think that people just kind of like stockpile all of these kind of habits that they find online and think that like, well, maybe the more that I have, the more efficient I'll be. And that's also like, it's not true. It's like the point of habits is to reduce the amount of decisions that you have to make total and take yourself out of the equation.
Exactly. Because if you're tired as hell and you don't want to brush your teeth, you're just going to be like, it's one day I'll miss. That's fine. But in the morning, you'll think about it. You'll be like, could have done it. But if that's a habit, you're not even going to think about that. You're just going to be like, all right, got to moisturize my face, brush my teeth, and then go to bed.
Yeah. Like I think the important thing about habits is that they are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Like when you decide that something is a habit, there is no days off. Like if you say I'm going to do this every other day, you have to really do it every other day.
Yeah.
And when you kind of build up the habit of doing it, it becomes harder to break the habit. And so like really keeping like
Yeah,
continue
it's like keeping a streak.
and keeping the streak is like probably the most important thing about having a habit. But of course, like before people actually even create these habits, I think there has to be an acknowledgement of how fallible we are. And I do find that like especially when I was in college, a lot of people have this like image of themselves that they have to be perfect and they have to be great, and that kind of stops them from acknowledging some of like the flaws that they might have in terms of small things within their like normal day-to-day system, you know?
Yeah.
And I think like as I've said, acknowledging and suppressing my ego is something that definitely helped me acknowledge that, okay, so there are things I need to improve on. They're like, I can't just rely on myself and just kind of like go headfirst into doing things like I'd done when I was in school. Because for me, school is very easy. You know what I mean? Like I really just had to sit down, do my homework, study. I had my extracurriculars, and I just kind of had to execute. But life is really not like that. And
No.
there are so many factors and so many difficulties and so many decisions that will come into play that will just make that execution that you might be so desperately trying to achieve incredibly difficult. And acknowledging that there are things to improve and that there might be flaws is something that's paramount in really becoming like efficient as you might see yourself as.
Yeah, you don't want to be suboptimal. No, I think you mentioning that is, it's poignant because at a certain point during the day, if you're not doing stuff, those intrusive thoughts are there, right?
For sure.
And if you're not obviously habits can be going for a run, brushing your teeth or whatever. But habits can also be like, all right, I'm drawing for 2 hours today. Boom, bam. And you just do that over, 3 months or something like that. Every day, 2 hours, whatever. That becomes a habit. That then leads your brain to growth because you're not thinking about those intrusive thoughts and you're not just ruminating on, oh man, like, should I have gone out with her that one time? Like, is that why we broke up? No, you're not thinking about those things because they don't matter. They don't matter anymore. And I think we worry about so many things that just don't matter. And they're not going to matter in 10 years. And for me, that's when it becomes annoying because it's like, because I'll be thinking about it and I'll be in a thought loop. And then it's like, why am I thinking about this? What am I doing? I'm getting up. What? And having the self-awareness to be like, I am thinking about this right now. I need to go do this because thinking about this right now is not helping me. It's not helping me be productive. It's just not.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from like being very obsessed with like the results of things.
We are a results-based society.
We're incredibly results-based. And this is something that I've also kind of discovered more recently, especially since like a lot of my job right now is just kind of making sure that I'm posting regularly on social media and creating like a decent body of work. I've kind of noticed that there's a certain point in my process in which I'm a decent way through, and I have this kind of hiccup where if I stop and I come back to it, I have this resilience to working on it because I'm thinking about how much work it's going to take to finish the piece. And that's something that I'm still kind of working around and have to kind of consciously fight. But what I've kind of realized is that I have to be focusing on the process more than I have to be focusing on the result. Like if I go into a piece thinking I have to finish it today, I'm less likely to really get to working on it versus if I say I'm just going to work 2 hours on this piece. You know what I mean? Like if I'm just going to work 2 to 4 hours on this piece, whatever happens. It's a much easier process than being like, oh, I have to complete this piece and I have to post it and I have to like the result and it has to get this many likes or whatever. All of that stuff is the stuff that actually ends up detrimental to the result.
Yeah, because it's interrupting your thinking for the process.
Exactly.
And you're more worried about sort of pleasing public and attracting more people that I feel it takes away from the art.
Yeah, and even it might not even be just like for the other people. Sometimes it's just for myself in terms of I just want the piece to be complete.
Yeah.
And when all of a sudden, when you're thinking of the end goal, the process becomes kind of just like a mode to get there rather than an experience that you really want to go through.
Yeah. Right.
And that's, I think, even when it comes to doing anything, even if it's not art related, I think that's a very important like thing to acknowledge and thing to focus on is like making sure that you're really present during the process and you're not dreading the process and not just focused on what is the exact thing you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Okay. So I think that also learning to fail is such an important part about just both growing pains and resilience, because understanding that, okay, I am going to fail. I'm going to make fuck ups in my life that I may think about for the rest of my life, whether big legal stuff or just little stuff in your brain. You're going to think about those failures, but using those failures to be like, okay, this is what I did that time. Maybe I should change something. And using that failure to add experience and add just wisdom is invaluable, because the next time you're definitely, you have experience. So you're less likely to fail.
No, it's exactly right. Because like I remember when I was younger, I was like absolutely terrified of failure, and I still am to an extent.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, like I still don't like doing things I'm not good at all, and it's 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 a lot because when growing up, and I think a lot of people also had this experience, is that failure was just not tolerated. It was not
Mm-mm.
it was not even like it wasn't even a thought.
You got
Like
an F on a test? Mm.
I think I failed maybe like one test or something like that.
Oh
Like
well, we're in different categories there.
yeah, but it was just it was honestly because like failing was not an option for me. Like it wasn't even like the expectation was so high that failure was not on the table.
Right.
And I do think that kind of stunted me in some ways because it's necessary failure is necessary in order to learn. And even when it comes to my art, I still have to deal with the fact that a lot of my ideas will fail when I'm creating a piece. And this causes me a lot of stress that I'm still dealing with. And I think a lot of it's because that I never learned that it's okay to fail. You know what I mean? It's okay to make mistakes, and you kind of have to be willing to make these mistakes in order to really create anything of meaning
Yeah,
and grow.
I was just going to say that not only do you need to learn that it's okay, you need to know that failure is literally part of the process.
Yeah.
Failure is the name of the damn game, unfortunately, because, you know, all of these people who have succeeded in our society, in some ways they have absolutely failed.
Usually multiple times.
Usually multiple times and in hilarious ways. But they still had the resilience to be like, fuck you. Now I have this information and I'm going to go back and do it even better.
Yeah, and they had the they had to make a conscious decision to acknowledge that the idea might fail and still go through with it. And I
Gotcha.
think that's one of the most important things is to like if you have an idea and if you get obsessed whether like if it will succeed or if it will fail, it will definitely be like paralyzing and it'll definitely inhibit the process that you're really trying to complete. And
Exactly.
in that sense, just being willing to fail is incredibly important.
Yeah, so I'm going to pop a personal cue for you. So, we're talking about truly learning about yourself and taking the time to acknowledge your worst aspects and learning to reflect. What was a time when you had to have that conversation with yourself and you were like, okay, something's not working. Something is not working. I need to make a change. Do you have an example in mind that is similar to that situation?
I think there was a moment I think in quarantine where it was like a few days in which I would like not get out of bed and I'd just be like I would just stay in bed for like hours.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my life it hasn't been like very difficult, I would say. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've been challenged in terms of the work that I'm doing, but I haven't necessarily been challenged on my self-discipline when it comes to outside of like there actually being consequences of like maybe failing a grade or failing a test or anything like that.
Right.
And so I kind of built up this image of myself as like someone who doesn't fail and someone who just has the work ethic to kind of like plow through whatever I'm kind of working on, which was kind of true when it came to school, but when it came to my actual work life, I realized that I didn't have that strength. Like that
Mm.
was all really I was really just coasting on anxiety. And
Mm. And just being like, oh man, gotta avoid this anxiety. Might as well do the work.
yeah, like I'm a serial procrastinator for sure, and like absolutely the worst procrastinator. And I would essentially fuel myself on that anxiety that's like, okay, you have this to do, let's just bust it out. And when that feeling comes into play, I can definitely work for as long as I need to. I've worked 12 hours straight, 14 hours straight. Like I can put in those hours, but really being able to work without anybody pushing me and being able to be consistent is something that I hadn't really experienced. And it definitely took a lot of introspection and it took a lot of will to kind of acknowledge my weakness in that aspect and really kind of work to kind of change that.
Word. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We appreciate that. Anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up and get out of here?
Sure. I think the last kind of thing I want to talk about is like coping with conflict. And this is where I hope I don't sound a bit preachy, but this is one of the things that like definitely like irritates the living daylights out of me. I'm sure if you've listened to a few other pods, you've heard me kind of talk about it when it comes to people really being able to cope with conflicts and opposing opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the things where I talk with my dad a lot about his job and kind of like the kind of situations that he has to deal with. And I found that a lot of adults even have just like never learned this. And like even adults in very high, even very intelligent people in very high positions of power with over 100 subordinates and everything, they can't deal with conflict. And I feel like that's a lot of the time why the majority of people have to deal with bad bosses. And
yeah.
like one of the things I realized, especially when I was in high school, is that people really don't know how to navigate discomfort, especially when it comes to like interpersonal conflicts and criticism.
Yeah, because I think in our society, there's such an avoidance of that feeling of, being like, oh no, something to deal with, make it go away,
Yeah, and I personally had to deal with I had a difficult time when it came to accepting criticism, especially when it came to my flaws, when it came to my kind of lack of empathy in some situations and kind of judgmental aspects of my personality, and that definitely worked against me in small but important situations and decisions that really didn't benefit myself or the people around me. But I found that a lot of the people that I've had to kind of deal with, especially when it came to the privileged people I've met in college, outside of like the cool ass people I met in my BSU, all y'all are dope. But like, especially when it came to a lot of the very people that were around me, it was something I realized that they had no ability to deal with. And I guess I'll give like a kind of like an anecdote, which would I have like a personal story from college.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in class and it was a philosophy class and we were talking about the difficulties of like each demographic, whether it be man, woman, black, white, etc. And this is like actually the worst conversation, by the way, like, oh my Lord, please never have this conversation.
That sounds terrible.
It's really just like a fucking circle jerk to the bottom of hell. Like it's
God.
And the demographic of this class, as this is art school, is going to be, it's like 1 to 10 men to women. And obviously like maybe not obviously, but 60 to 70% of the class is going to be white. And as people are talking about why their group has it the worst, essentially, I remember one of the women of color in the class brought up how divorce impacts men in a particularly harsh way when it comes to children. And at that moment, I have never seen like the fury of white women turn against someone so fucking quick. Like she was immediately bombarded with like the hatred of the patriarchy and essentially dismissed in a poof of colored hair. And like it was
Jesus.
It was really harsh. And as I saw this, like as a child of a divorced family, I was told and I also understood the power that my mom held when it came to custody. And I'm very glad that I was able to experience dual custody, and I've had the chance to like really foster a relationship with my father, as a lot of people have not. And
Mm-hmm.
I offered my opinion, and the response I was met with was like, "That's just your experience. It doesn't represent anything."
Mm.
And this is from some random white girl who is as privileged as could fucking be, and not
Yeah,
ign-
she's from fucking East West Missouri. She grew up going to Lake Tahoe, and daddy owns like a supermarket chain.
yeah, and not acknowledge, and not just not, and I'm also acknowledging my privilege and situation, because we're all going to this school that has crazy high tuition.
Mm-hmm.
But I was coming from a place of someone that I knew that I was privileged, and it was a point in which I realized, despite her talking about all these problems with like people of color and all these things, she actually really didn't know her privilege.
Mm.
And it wasn't that anything that she was saying is wrong. I mean, like, obviously fuck the patriarchy, and there are a lot of things in still today that are like that go against women in almost every facet. And there are a lot of problems relating to that we see in politics today that are just not dealt with and not really talked about. But that doesn't mean that my experience or the other woman's experience had and other people of color don't exist. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
know it's like a controversial topic, but like what I'm trying to show is like how easy it is to disregard people and information when it doesn't match up with what you already believe.
I just did it myself. I completely disregarded this young woman's experience and just said she's from East West Missouri. So, boom, we all do it.
Yeah, we all do it. And like even though we like we don't necessarily always acknowledge that what we believe is completely based off of our lived experience and the information we have each accepted to be true. And with that story, I do want to say that that response to another person, like especially like her response to the lady as well as to me, is absolutely unacceptable, and
Right.
it's not productive. That's
No.
fucking Twitter speak. And I think that when people really talk like that, especially on Twitter, and really try to shit on each other, I think it's actually like abhorrent. I think it's a horrible habit, and I think it actually needs to stop. And I really don't care on this point about whether people dislike this opinion or think, oh well, I have the right to voice my opinion. And it's not about whether you have the right to voice your opinion or not. It's about whether your opinion is actually helping or hurting the causes that you're actually trying to like.
Or if it's just noise.
Yeah, like and but to me it's like it's really difficult to kind of come to terms with the fact when people are arguing, whether it be about politics on the left or the right, and they're like, oh, this person got ratioed when they said this, that, and the third. But
You
it's
know
like,
I love a good ratio.
yeah, but at the
But
same time,
mainly for sports stuff. Mainly for sports stuff, people.
yeah, but it's like at the same time, it's like, oh, you just ratioed that person. Do you think that person actually learned anything that you were trying to say? Like, do you think that person is actually is gonna like have a moment of reflection and be like, oh, maybe what I was thinking wasn't that great? No, that's not what's gonna happen. They're only gonna
Mm.
foster their hatred towards whatever demographic that they were essentially ratioed by, and you've essentially lost another person to the side that you're trying to fight.
Yeah, because it's much easier to be like, wait, it's much easier to get worked up than it is to understand.
Exactly. And I find that a lot of the time, this is how people disagree with each other if they're not friends. And that absolutely bleeds into the workforce as well.
Oh, yeah.
And learning how to really communicate your opinion without invalidating the experience of others is a skill that I've struggled with and had to learn. And it's a skill that I hope people become more aware of, especially when it comes to politics and their conflicts in the workplace. Because like I honestly cannot deal with everyone fucking yelling about like I don't even care about the issue specifically, but it's like whether it be about Black Lives Matter, whether it be about, you know, vaccines, whether it be about anything, and just they're just like yelling at the other side without any like notion to their rhetoric or the way that they're speaking. You know what I mean? It's like it really baffles me. And it's something that like, you know, there's like a moment in which people kind of decide like, oh, if this person has the opposite opinion of me, then they're wrong. And then that gives me carte blanche to kind of say whatever the fuck I want because they're wrong. And
yeah, you can really just tee off essentially.
Yeah. You people think they have the right to just tee off on someone because they believe they're wrong. And I think that's something that we really need to overcome, and something that I think our generation especially really needs to like come to terms with, of like how to really express your ideas in an actual productive way. And I'm definitely gonna be I already kind of decided earlier in the year that I'm going to be much more harsh when it comes to when I see my friends doing that. Like I really don't like, and regardless of like maybe some of my friends won't like me for it. I really don't give a shit. But when it comes to people that are very politically aware, I think it's very important that we really hold ourselves accountable, and if we really want to even accomplish anything.
All right, you heard it here first. Anything else on resilience?
I think I don't want to end on like kind of like a ranty angry note, but when it comes to resilience, I think that putting yourself in the position to really like to fail is the most important thing about like becoming resilient. And whether that be putting your opinion out there, putting your work out there to be judged, anything that really builds your tolerance to conflict or anything like that, I think is incredibly important. Exposing yourself to the other side of information that you may not agree with, and being able to process that information and take what you can learn from it and apply it to yourself is another form of gaining resilience that I think is very useful. And I think there are a lot of ways in which we can really, through resilience, not only like foster our understanding, but also it will help our motivation, and it'll definitely like help bring people together as well.
All right, there you go. Yeah, I definitely sign off on that last statement. Before we get out of here, anything to shout out, anything to put into words?
Yeah, I don't really have much.
All right. So thank y'all very much for listening. This has been the Plan C podcast episode today. If you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify. We are all there. Rate us. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear what you think. Check out previous podcasts. We started a weekly sports show, 15 minutes. If you don't watch or pay attention to sports, check it out. It's designed exactly for you. And until next time, Cameron, thank you. Great job by you today.
Great job by you as well. Good
Thanks.
one.
Thanks, pal. See you at the next one. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to wear a mask.